Hello, my name is Darren Elkins. I am a clinical director here at Blomquist Hale, and I love to have this opportunity to talk with you about these important topics. And today, in our short discussion, we're going to talk about for leaders, how do we navigate health, our mental health in the workplace? I know that it can feel daunting, right? I bet when you became a leader in your life, whether it's at work or in some other way, you didn't know you were going to become a therapist too, right? But it can feel that way sometimes that for some reason people start to lean on us and in ways that aren't natural in other settings might start to become part of our life. For example, when someone's late to work today, they start to tell me why. And next thing you know, they might be sharing some things about their personal life that I start to think, what do I do with this? There used to be a time, it seemed, for companies where leaders were expected to just stay out of it, right? The common sense of the day was that it was none of your business, that when people came to work, they were employees and they went home, it was none of your business. That's changed, not only to where it's more acceptable, but actually um, necessary and important for us to understand mental health and in certain ways be involved in the well-being of our employees. Obviously, there are limits to that, and that's what scares us is we don't always know how far I should go with that, right? We fear of getting in trouble with being over involved, and there are problems that could come from being over involved in people's lives. But the more common mistake that people make these days is to look away and do nothing. There are great consequences for that as a company, also for you as an individual and for them. And but again, it comes from that fear of making mistakes that we do that. So what's the remedy? The remedy is to educate ourselves, be informed about mental health, about what it means in as my role as a leader in their mental health journey. And this understanding will build confidence and help you avoid that common mistake of looking the other way. So I'm going to use the three-part system here to help you through that. One is it's called learn, act, and advocate. First, learn. Through educating yourself a little bit about the situation, you'll feel a little more confident. To understand that right now, what we're up against is that only about 28% of employees feel comfortable talking about their mental health at work. Just one in four, a little over that. And about the same amount of people, one in four, are struggling with a mental health diagnosis of some kind at any given time. So it's a prevalent thing, and people don't feel. So if you had one in four struggling with something and only maybe 25% willing to talk about it, we're not having a lot of conversations about mental health and dealing with it. So in understanding what it's at play here, let's talk about some of those common things you'll see and how they interact with you. The most common mental health diagnosis you won't be surprised about is depression. It's one of the more common ones. About over a third of people will face that meet the criteria for a major depressive episode at least once in their lifetime, and many will do it more than once. Anxiety is on the rise. Anxiety is also a very common one, and it's very closely related to depression and sometimes comes from the same thought processes that create anxiety. It's said that the difference might be that depression's often about the past and our reflection and our sadness about the events of the past or leading up till now. And anxiety is often about the future and worry about what's around the next corner. Anxiety is on the rise for reasons that you might not be surprised, right? Social media, information overload, and a feeling of comparison and wondering if we're going to meet up to the standard. Addiction continues to be, though less common, both of those, one of the most destructive, if not the most destructive mental health disorder and its consequence, right? We see how it tears people apart and families and can lead to just very, very um, concerning and costly things in people's lives. When you look at the prevalence of addiction and suicide and see how often, as much as 50% of all suicides are somebody who's addicted to alcohol, when you consider how rare both of those things are, and that 50% have that coming together, that tells you how severe important addiction is in terms of mental health. And ADHD is another common one, and this is no longer just considered like the thing we're concerned about with young people, but that adults face this in the workplace as well. And then things like bipolar. Bipolar is another one that's very well managed and treated if you do your medication management right, but is also very prevalent. Not as prevalent as the others, but common and is something you're facing. There are others, and many of those others are kind of like in the family of those, like post-traumatic stress disorders under the anxiety kind of family, right? So you see other types of specific phobias and things like that that can be related to some of those other diagnoses. Your job isn't to know how to diagnose or over concern you about the specifics of diagnosing them. It's your job, and right, our charge as leaders is to have some basic understanding of what those things are. So when someone presents as being an issue in their life, you have some understanding of how that might impact them and have some flexibility around that. Um, and ours is, by the way, if you want to continue to understand some of those better, we have longer versions of these webinars that we do that might be a deeper dive in understanding some of the symptoms and things that they face. Um, so after you've learned, you've kind of educated yourself a little bit about that, then there's the issue of acting. And the greatest act you can do as a leader is to listen. And that requires active participation, right? Listening isn't just about nodding your head along, but asking questions to try to understand without judgment or rushing to solutions. And then it's to act and offer assistance in practical ways you're comfortable with. A study on therapeutic effectiveness showed that the most important factor in the outcomes of positive, making progress in therapy was that the client felt cared about and understood by their therapist. Now, you can provide that part without being a therapist, right? You can feel like they can feel like you care about them and that you understand the best you can what they're going through. The rest is something you can turn them over to us to help with, right? So then as you are providing flexibility, comfort, and empathy, and then you can guide them into further assistance through counseling and other things and provide resources to normalize that, to make it okay to share your stories, perhaps even of how it's helped to get help. And the last one is to advocate. And this means to help stick up for that person, help them through their issues. Now, maybe at work, it might mean having discussions as a leadership team about ways that you can reasonably accommodate people who are having struggles and then again to help them through it. One of the key symptoms of all these mental health disorders is the lack of hopelessness that can come as you deal with them. For depression, anxiety, it's a key symptom is that you start to feel checked out from from the things you enjoy, and also that you start to feel like you can't get anything done, and so you start to give up. And so it might mean that your part could be to help them, to be that motivation, to help guide them, not taking over, right? Not becoming their person who does things for them all the time, but who helps advocate and get them connected to those things and help them stay with it. So I know it can be daunting, but it is very important for us as leaders and can become very rewarding. One of the most enjoyable parts of your job can become the ways that you help people, whether it's the diagnosable disorder or just the stress of life, that as you are becoming a person who listens, acts, and advocates for their well-being in their lives. As you do so, I know that you'll find the joy and the benefits that come to the company as well as you do that. Thank you for joining me today.